I thought signing the divorce papers would silence her name in my life. That's what I told myself 15 months ago as I stood in my penthouse overlooking Manhattan, watching the city glow like it belonged to me. I built an empire out of discipline and distance. Distance keeps people safe. That's what I believed when I let Emily walk away. I told the world it was mutual, amicable, clean. But nothing about losing her was clean. I still kept her coffee mug in the back of the cabinet. Still paused when my phone buzzed late at night, half expecting her voice. At 2:17 a.m., the call finally came. Not from her. From a hospital on the Upper East Side. The nurse's voice was calm, professional. "Mr. Cole, you were named as the father." For a second, I didn't understand the sentence. Father. The word didn't fit inside the life I'd built. I don't make mistakes. I don't lose control. Yet my hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles burned white. "There must be some confusion," I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. 14 months old. Male. Admitted with respiratory distress. The numbers lined up too perfectly. 15 months since the divorce. I did the math without meaning to. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass looked unfamiliar. Custom suit. Silver watch. A man who commands rooms with a glance. And suddenly I couldn't command my own breathing. I was in the car within minutes, the city blurring past in streaks of red and white. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. I walked through sliding glass doors that opened automatically, like even buildings knew to get out of my way. But in that hallway, under fluorescent lights, none of my power mattered. Then I saw her. Emily. Same chestnut hair pulled back in a loose knot. Same eyes that used to soften when she looked at me. Now they were guarded. Tired. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked resigned. "You came," she said quietly, as if she hadn't expected me to, as if I hadn't once promised to always show up. "Is he mine?" The question tasted like metal. She didn't answer with words. She stepped aside. Through the glass partition, I saw him. Small, curled beneath a thin hospital blanket. A monitor beeped steadily beside him. Dark hair, tiny fist resting near his cheek. And when his eyes fluttered open for a second, I felt the ground shift beneath a 6'2" man who had never bowed to anyone. They were my eyes. Same shade, same intensity, just softer. Unbroken. Something inside my chest cracked in a way no business rival ever could. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, not taking my eyes off the child. Emily's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "Because someone inside your world didn't want him alive." The hallway felt colder. My empire suddenly felt fragile. I built it to control everything, to protect what was mine. And now I was staring at the one thing that truly was. My son. And for the first time in years, I realized power means nothing if you don't know what you're protecting. Emily did not look at me when she said it. She kept her eyes on the small rise and fall of our son's chest, as if that rhythm was the only thing holding her together. The fluorescent lights above us hummed softly, steady and indifferent, while my entire world tilted on its axis. "What do you mean someone inside my world?" I asked quietly. My voice stayed calm. It always did. That was how I survived. But inside, something sharp and unfamiliar pressed against my ribs. Fear. Emily folded her arms across her chest, not defensive, just bracing herself. 3 days before I filed for divorce, I received a message. No name, no signature. Just a photo of me walking into my doctor's office and a note that said accidents happen every day. The air felt thinner. I remembered that week. I remembered thinking she had grown distant. I remembered assuming she was tired of the life, the security, the constant shadows that followed me. I never imagined she was protecting something. Protecting someone. "You could have told me," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Told me what? That someone in my organization had the courage to threaten my wife? That I had built a system so powerful it could turn against the only person who ever mattered? She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were not angry. They were exhausted. "Adrian, I was pregnant. I was not going to gamble our baby's life on your ability to figure out who was loyal and who was not. Our baby." The phrase landed heavier than any accusation. Through the glass, the nurse adjusted the small blanket around him. My son shifted slightly, his tiny fingers curling instinctively, as if searching for something to hold on to. I had negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking. I had stared down men twice my size without hesitation. But I hesitated now. "Does he know me?" I asked. It was a ridiculous question. He was 14 months old. He barely knew the world. No, Emily said softly. He knows my voice. He knows the sound of rain against the window in our apartment. He knows the lullaby my mother used to sing. There was no bitterness in her tone, just truth, the kind that cuts deeper because it is clean. I stepped closer to the glass, placing my palm against it without thinking. The barrier felt symbolic, transparent, but solid, just like the last 15 months. I thought distance was protection. I thought signing papers would erase danger. Instead, it only erased me from my son's life. Why call me now? I asked. Emily swallowed. Because whoever sent that message reached out again last week. This time they mentioned him by name. My heart stopped for half a second. They know, I said. It was not a question. She nodded once. And if they know, then hiding is not enough anymore. For the first time since I walked into that hospital, I understood something clearly. This was not about reclaiming my pride. It was not about repairing my image. It was about becoming the kind of man my son could survive being born to. I built an empire on control. Now I had to find the crack inside it before it swallowed the only family I had left. The silence between us felt heavier than the city skyline outside the hospital windows. I had spent years detecting weakness in other men, spotting hesitation in their posture, doubt in their tone. Now I searched my own reflection in the glass and saw it clearly. I had been outmaneuvered, not by an enemy with power, but by fear inside my own house. No one outside my inner circle knew about you, I said quietly. Your appointments were private. Your security detail rotated. Emily gave me a tired look. You are assuming the threat came from outside your circle. The words settled slowly, like dust after a collapse. My inner circle. The men who had stood beside me for years. The ones who toasted at my wedding. The ones who signed documents in my office while my wife sat 10 feet away, planning nursery colors I never got to see. I exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. That was how I processed information. Emotion later. Strategy first. Who else knows about Noah now? I asked. She hesitated. Just my landlord and one pediatrician in Queens. I kept our last name off every record. He has mine. That detail cut deeper than she intended. My son did not carry my name. Not because she hated me. Because she was trying to keep him alive. Through the glass, a nurse adjusted the oxygen line beneath his tiny nose. He stirred, restless. Instinct pulled me forward before pride could stop me. Can I asked. Emily studied me for a moment, then nodded once. The nurse opened the door quietly and stepped aside. The room felt smaller than I expected. Machines hummed softly. A cartoon giraffe sticker clung to the wall near the crib, absurdly cheerful. I stepped closer, careful, aware of my size, my presence. He was so small, 14 months old, barely 2 feet tall. I slid my finger gently into his open palm. He closed his hand around it without opening his eyes. The grip was weak but certain. Something inside my chest shifted permanently. I had shaken hands with senators. I had signed deals that moved millions of dollars in a single afternoon. None of it compared to the weight of that tiny hand. I will fix this, I said softly, not to Emily, not even to the room, but to him. My son did not know my voice. He did not know the sound of my footsteps or the way I cleared my throat before speaking. But he would. I felt it like a vow forming under my skin. When I stepped back into the hallway, the strategist returned. Calm. Focused. I need the message, I told Emily. Every detail. Timestamps. Delivery method. She searched my face as if measuring whether I was responding as a father or as the man she once left. Adrian, she said carefully, this cannot be handled the way you handle everything else. I held her gaze. You are right. This time I am not protecting an empire. I glanced back through the glass at Noah, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I am protecting my son. And for the first time since I built my name into something untouchable, I understood that being feared was easy. Being trusted was not. If the danger lived inside my world, then I would tear that world apart piece by piece until I found it. Not with rage, not with spectacle, but with precision. Because this time, the stakes were not business. They were blood. Emily handed me her phone with steady fingers, but I could see the tension in the way her thumb hovered near the screen, as if even now she was reluctant to let me step fully into this part of her life. The message was simple. No name, no number, just a private sender and a single line beneath a recent photo of Noah in a stroller outside her apartment building in Queens. We know who he belongs to. The timestamp was 3 days ago. My jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. This was not random. It was deliberate, close enough to observe, careful enough to stay invisible. I memorized every detail before handing the phone back. Has anyone new been around your building? I asked quietly. She shook her head. Nothing obvious. A delivery truck parked across the street last week, but that is not unusual. A man on the corner once or twice. I thought I was imagining it. I nodded slowly. Fear makes patterns out of shadows. But sometimes the shadows are real. I stepped into the hallway and pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I simply gave instructions. 2 trusted men. Background checks on every employee who had access to my private calendar 18 months ago. Financial audits on anyone whose lifestyle had shifted recently. Discreet inquiries only. No noise. No signals. If there was a crack in my foundation, I would find it quietly. When I returned to the room, Emily was sitting beside Noah's crib, humming softly under her breath. The melody was gentle, familiar. I realized I had heard it once before in our old townhouse on a winter night, when the snow had fallen heavy and silent outside the windows. I had been on a conference call. She had been in the kitchen, unaware I was listening. I stood a few feet away now, unsure where to place myself. Power had always given me direction. This felt different. You should not go back to your apartment, I said carefully. She stiffened slightly. I am not moving into one of your properties, Adrian. There it was. The line she had drawn 15 months ago. I respected it. Not mine. I replied evenly. Neutral ground. A furnished townhouse under a corporate lease. No link to my name. Increased security, but subtle. She studied me for a long moment. And what happens when whoever this is realizes you are involved? I held her gaze. They already assume I am. The difference now is that I will not be reacting. I will be anticipating. Noah shifted in his sleep, a soft sound escaping his lips. Instinct moved me closer again. I brushed a fingertip lightly against his tiny socked foot, careful, reverent. I built everything in my life on control, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. But control without trust is fragile. I trusted the wrong people. Emily's voice softened. Then trust the right ones now. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had carried our son alone. The woman who had walked away not because she stopped loving me, but because she refused to risk his life. I had mistaken her silence for abandonment. It was courage. You will not do this alone anymore, I said finally. Not as a command, as a promise. And for the first time since that early morning call, I felt something stronger than fear rising in my chest. Not anger, not pride, responsibility. If someone inside my empire believed they could threaten my family and remain hidden, they underestimated the one thing I had never been before. A father who has something real to lose. The discharge papers were signed just after noon the next day, and I watched the nurse place Noah into a small car seat that looked impossibly fragile for something carrying my entire future. Emily moved carefully, instinctively shielding him from passing strangers, her body curved protectively around his. I memorized that posture. I should have known she would never walk away without a reason strong enough to outweigh love. Outside, Manhattan felt loud again. Taxis honked. Sirens echoed somewhere downtown. The world continued as if nothing had shifted, but everything had. I had arranged the townhouse overnight. 3 stories, brick exterior, quiet block in Brooklyn Heights. Neutral ownership. Security integrated into the building systems, invisible to anyone who did not know where to look. When we arrived, I stepped out first, scanning automatically, then caught myself. This was not about paranoia. It was about precision. Emily noticed the shift in me. You are different, she said quietly as we walked up the steps. I did not ask what she meant. I felt it too. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh paint and clean linen. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, warm and steady. It did not feel like one of my properties. It felt almost normal. Emily carried Noah to the living room couch and settled beside him. He blinked up at the unfamiliar ceiling, wide green eyes tracking the light. I stood a few feet away, unsure again of where I fit. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. A message from one of my analysts. Preliminary review complete. 2 anomalies. I did not open it immediately. For the first time in years, I let a business alert wait. Instead, I crouched down in front of my son. You are going to hear my voice often now, I said softly. He stared at me, studying. as if deciding whether I belonged in his world. His fingers reached toward my tie, grasping the silk with surprising strength. I let out a quiet breath that felt almost like a laugh. Emily watched the exchange, something unreadable in her expression. "He has your focus," she said. "When he wants something, he does not let go." I met her eyes. "That trait can be dangerous." She shook her head gently. "It can also be loyal." The word lingered between us. Loyalty. I had demanded it my entire career. I had rewarded it. I had assumed it. But I had never truly examined it. My phone vibrated again. I stood slowly and stepped into the kitchen, opening the message this time. One name stood out immediately. A senior operations director who had quietly expanded his authority over the past year. Access to schedules. Access to internal security logs. Access to personal records, including mine. I felt the pieces align with unsettling clarity. Not proof, but direction. I returned to the living room, my expression controlled. Emily looked up, reading me the way she always had. "You found something." It was not a question. I nodded once. A starting point. She adjusted the blanket around Noah's legs. "And what happens now?" I looked at my son again. At the way his chest rose evenly. At the way his small hand still clutched the edge of my tie like a claim. "Now," I said quietly, "I become more careful than the man who believes he is hidden." Emily studied me for a long moment. Not with fear, not with doubt, with cautious hope. For years I believed power meant being untouchable, standing above the city, unreachable. I was wrong. Real power is standing in a quiet Brooklyn living room, knowing that if you fail, you lose more than status. You lose the only two people who ever made you human. And I was not going to fail them. The house grew quiet after sunset, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint rush of traffic 3 blocks away. Noah was asleep upstairs in the temporary nursery we arranged that afternoon, a soft night light casting a pale glow across the walls. I stood in the kitchen alone, jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled to my forearms. I had not rolled up my sleeves in years unless I intended to work. Tonight, the work was personal. The name on my screen stared back at me. Daniel Mercer, Senior Operations Director. With me for 8 years. Trusted with expansion logistics, internal security routing, digital oversight. Trusted with proximity. Too much proximity. I replayed the last 18 months in my head, searching for moments I had dismissed. His suggestion to centralize access logs. His insistence on restructuring the security rotation. His subtle questions about my travel schedule during the final weeks of my marriage. None of it had seemed threatening at the time. It had seemed efficient. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the counter until the pressure grounded me. This was not proof. Suspicion without evidence destroys more than betrayal ever could. I needed certainty. My phone vibrated softly. An encrypted message from my analyst. Financial review indicates undisclosed transfers to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Amount small. Consistent. Pattern suggests leverage fund. I inhaled slowly. Leverage. That was the word that settled into place. Someone had not wanted immediate destruction. They wanted control. Information held quietly, waiting for the right moment. My divorce had not been an emotional fracture. It had been engineered isolation. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. Emily stood in the doorway, arms folded lightly across her chest. "You have that look," she said quietly. I turned off the screen. "What look?" She tilted her head slightly. "The one you get when you are 5 steps ahead of everyone else." I held her gaze. "This time I am trying to be 10. She walked into the kitchen and leaned against the opposite counter. There was distance between us, but not hostility. Just history. "If it is who you think it is," she asked carefully, "what happens?" I considered the question. In my old world, consequences were swift and decisive. Authority had to be visible. Fear had to be reinforced. But that was before I had a son sleeping upstairs. "What happens," I said slowly, "is that I remove access. Quietly. I isolate the breach. I let him believe he is still secure while I close every door around him." Emily watched me closely. "No confrontation?" I shook my head once. "Not until I know why. Motive matters. Was this ambition? Resentment? Or something deeper? A rival using an insider as leverage?" The thought of my son's photo in someone else's hands tightened something inside my chest. I stepped away from the counter and walked toward the staircase. Halfway up, I paused and looked back at Emily. I should have seen it, I said quietly. I was so focused on appearing untouchable that I did not see where I was exposed. Her voice followed me gently. You are seeing it now. Upstairs, I stood in the doorway of Noah's room. He slept on his side, one tiny hand curled near his face. The soft glow of the monitor light reflected off his hair. I stepped closer and rested my palm lightly against the edge of the crib. You will never know how close you came to being a secret, I whispered. Not a threat, not a vow of revenge. A promise of protection. Downstairs, my phone vibrated again. I did not check it immediately. For the first time in my life, I understood that strategy was not about dominance. It was about safeguarding what cannot defend itself. And I was done confusing power with protection. Morning light filtered through the tall Brooklyn windows in thin gold. Lines, quiet, and almost innocent. For a moment, I stood at the foot of the stairs listening. No alarms. No urgent calls. Just the soft sound of Emily moving in the kitchen and the faint, uneven babble of a 14-month-old discovering his voice. I had negotiated ceasefires between rivals with less tension than I felt walking into that living room. Noah was sitting on a blanket on the floor, small wooden blocks scattered around him. He looked up when I entered, studying me with the same focus he had the night before. Not fear. Not recognition. Assessment. I lowered myself slowly onto the floor across from him. Careful, deliberate. Good morning, I said, my voice calm and steady. He blinked, then slapped one of the blocks against the hardwood in triumph. The sound echoed lightly through the room. Emily watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand. There was something fragile in the air. Not weakness. Possibility. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. I let it. Noah reached for another block and then paused, eyes lifting to mine again. He extended it toward me as if offering terms. I accepted, placing it carefully on top of another. The tower wobbled. He laughed, a short, surprised sound that hit somewhere deep in my chest. I had spent years building structures that could not fall. Yet this tiny, unstable tower felt more significant than any skyline I had shaped. The phone vibrated again. Emily crossed the room and handed it to me silently. A message from my analyst. Mercer accessed archived marital records 18 months ago. Unauthorized. Timestamp matches week prior to anonymous threat. My pulse did not quicken. It slowed. Clarity has a temperature. Cold. Precise. I typed a brief reply. Freeze his access. Audit every external communication channel. No alerts. Maintain routine. I set the phone down face down. Noah was watching me again, as if he sensed the shift. I picked up another block and handed it back to him. We build carefully. I murmured, more to myself than to him. Emily stepped closer. You know it is him now. I nodded once. I know enough. There was a difference. Certainty required proof. I would not act without it. Not anymore. Noah leaned forward suddenly and pressed his small palm against my chest, just below my collarbone, as if steadying himself. The contact lasted only a second, but it anchored me in a way no strategy ever had. I covered his hand gently with mine. He trusts you, Emily said softly. I looked at her. He does not know better. She shook her head. He feels intention. The word lingered. Intention. Mine had shifted. I was no longer protecting a reputation. I was protecting a future. Down the block, a delivery truck rolled past slowly. I noticed. Not with panic. With calculation. Layers of quiet security were already in place. Unmarked vehicles. Rotating personnel who did not know the full picture. Mercer would continue his routine today, unaware that every keystroke, every call, every meeting was being mapped. Not to punish. To understand. I glanced around the sunlit room. This was the center now. Not my penthouse office. Not a boardroom. A living room with scattered toys and the faint smell of coffee. Noah knocked the tower over and clapped at the crash, delighted by the sound. I let myself smile fully for the first time in months. Let it fall, I thought. Structures can be rebuilt. Trust, once broken, requires something else. Patience, precision, and a reason strong enough to change the man who built the structure in the first place. I had that reason now. By late afternoon, the sunlight had shifted, stretching long across the hardwood floors and turning the Brooklyn townhouse into something almost peaceful. Almost. Peace is fragile when you know someone has been watching from the shadows. Noah had fallen asleep again after lunch, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm through the baby monitor speaker on the kitchen counter. Emily was folding tiny clothes at the dining table, movements methodical, controlled. I stood by the window, phone pressed to my ear, listening more than speaking. Mercer's digital trail was widening. He had accessed archived personal files not only once, but repeatedly over a span of 3 weeks 18 months ago. He had rerouted certain security notifications through an internal filter that reported directly to him before escalating to me. Not enough to raise alarms. Just enough to control information flow. That was the pattern. Control. I ended the call and remained still for a moment, watching a jogger pass outside, unaware of the recalibration happening behind these walls. Emily's voice was soft, but steady. It is confirmed. I nodded. It is consistent. There is a difference between suspicion and confirmation. One creates tension. The other creates direction. I walked to the table and sat across from her. For the first time since I built my name into something formidable, I allowed someone to see the fracture beneath it. He did not threaten you directly, I said. He engineered distance. He knew if you left me, I would focus outward. Expansion. Growth. Not inward. Emily folded one more shirt and set it aside. He underestimated one thing. I met her eyes. What? That distance does not erase connection. The truth of it landed heavily. Mercer had calculated risk. He had calculated leverage. What he had not calculated was the possibility that 15 months later, I would still answer a call at 2 in the morning and drive across Manhattan without hesitation. My phone vibrated again. A live update. Mercer scheduled a private meeting tonight with an external consultant flagged in prior investigations. Location, Midtown. Timing, 8 p.m. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:30. I stood slowly. Emily rose too, sensing the shift. You are going, she said. Not fear. Recognition. I nodded once. To observe. Not confront. That was important. Impulse is weakness. Strategy is strength. I walked upstairs briefly, stepping into Noah's room. He slept on his stomach now, small fingers curled under his chin. I crouched beside the crib and let my hand rest gently against the mattress edge. You will never know how carefully this is being handled, I whispered. Not because he could understand the words, but because I needed to say them. Downstairs, I slipped on my jacket. The weight of it felt different than it had a week ago. Not armor. Responsibility. Emily stepped closer as I reached the door. Do not become the man you were before, she said quietly. I paused. For years, I believed the man I was before was necessary. Unyielding. Detached. Efficient. Now I understood that version of me had left room for betrayal. I turned back to her. I am not going to destroy him, I said calmly. I am going to expose him. There is a difference. Destruction is loud. Exposure is final. Outside, the evening air was cool, sharp against my face. A car waited at the curb, engine running softly. As I stepped inside, I glanced back at the townhouse once. The windows glowed warm against the darkening sky. That glow was the center now. Not power, not reputation, not fear. Just two people inside who deserved safety without living in the shadow of my mistakes. Mercer believed he had manipulated the board. Tonight, I would begin turning the pieces. Not for dominance. For something far more dangerous to a man like him. Accountability. Midtown was all glass and reflected light. The kind of place where power hid behind polished surfaces and polite smiles. I did not walk into the restaurant where Mercer had scheduled his meeting. I did not need to. Observation is most effective when unseen. From the back seat of the car parked across the street, I watched through tinted windows as he arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, posture confident, stride measured. He looked the same as he always had. Tailored suit. Calm expression. The kind of man who blends into boardrooms and charity galas without raising suspicion. That was his strength. And his mistake. My phone screen glowed softly in my hand as live updates streamed in. Audio capture confirmed. External consultant identified as intermediary tied to a competitor group seeking leverage in logistics expansion. Not confrontation. Negotiation. Mercer was not trying to destroy me. He was trying to weaken my leverage by isolating me from the one vulnerability he had discovered. My family. I leaned back against the leather seat, eyes fixed on the entrance. He believed he had removed the variable by pushing Emily away. He believed the absence of a wife meant the absence of a threat. What he did not anticipate was that fatherhood would not make me reckless. It would make me precise. The analyst's next message appeared. Mercer discussing contingency plan if Cole discovers breach. He assumes no knowledge yet. Good. Let him assume. Across the street, Mercer shook hands with a man in a charcoal overcoat. Their movements were subtle. No raised voices. No visible tension. Just quiet calculation. I thought about Noah's hand gripping my tie that morning. The weight of that small gesture grounded me now more than any strategic advantage. Begin phase 2, I said quietly into the secure line. There was no need to raise my voice. Within minutes, Mercer's internal access was mirrored entirely to my private system. Every email drafted, every document opened, every encrypted message rerouted through a silent copy protocol. Exposure begins with illumination. The restaurant doors opened. Again, and Mercer stepped out alone, adjusting his cufflinks as if the meeting had been nothing more than routine business. He checked his phone. I watched the faint shift in his expression as an alert appeared. Internal audit notification. Routine compliance review. Initiated by executive order. Mine. Not aggressive. Not accusatory. Routine. That was the brilliance of it. He could not object without revealing anxiety. He could not resist without exposing himself. The car engine hummed softly beneath me as I allowed myself one slow breath. This was not about revenge. It was about recalibration. Back in Brooklyn, Emily was likely reading a bedtime story, her voice low and steady. Noah would be drifting towards sleep, unaware that the balance of power surrounding his future was being quietly restructured in real time. My phone vibrated once more. Mercer accessing secure server. Increased activity. He was searching for confirmation, for signs of suspicion. He would find none. I stepped out of the car then, not to approach him, but to walk in the opposite direction. Let him wonder. Let him question. The most destabilizing force in any system is uncertainty. As I turned the corner, the city air felt different against my face. Cooler. Sharper. I had once believed dominance required visibility. Now I understood that true control operates beneath the surface, unseen but absolute. Mercer thought he had isolated me by targeting my family. Instead, he had revealed himself. And once a hidden hand is illuminated, it loses its power to move freely. Tonight was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous to a man who thrives in shadows. Transparency. When I returned to Brooklyn that night, the townhouse lights were dimmed and the street was quiet, almost deceptively calm. I stepped inside without a sound, closing the door gently behind me. The scent of lavender drifted faintly from upstairs, and I could hear the low murmur of Emily's voice through the baby monitor. She was finishing a bedtime story. I paused in the hallway and listened. Her tone was steady, warm, unguarded in a way I had not heard in years. It struck me then that while I had been recalibrating an empire, she had been building a world measured in lullabies and careful routines. When she came downstairs a few minutes later, she studied my face immediately. You did not confront him, she said softly. I shook my head once. No, I gave him something worse. She waited. Uncertainty. I moved into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, letting the silence stretch long enough to feel intentional rather than strained. He met with an intermediary tied to a competitor. I continued. Not to replace me. To leverage me. Emily leaned against the counter. By isolating you. Yes. I set the glass down. He believed that removing you from my life would remove my vulnerability. He never anticipated that the vulnerability would become my focus. She absorbed that quietly. Outside, a car passed, headlights sliding across the ceiling before fading. For years I equated control with intimidation. Tonight proved otherwise. Control is patience. Mercer had received the audit notice by now. A compliance review so ordinary he could not protest it without drawing attention. His digital footprint was being copied in real time. His financial transfers flagged. His communications mirrored. He would wake up tomorrow sensing pressure, but unable to identify its source. That tension would force mistakes. And mistakes reveal truth. Emily walked toward the living room, and I followed. The baby monitor screen glowed softly on the coffee table, showing Noah asleep on his back now, one arm stretched above his head. I sat down slowly, watching him breathe through the small screen. There is something else, I said quietly. Emily looked at me. The shell corporation Mercer funded has been quietly acquiring minor shares in one of my subsidiary distribution firms. Not enough to control it. Enough to disrupt contracts if activated. Her expression tightened. He was building leverage from inside. I nodded. Yes. Gradual. Strategic. He wanted a future where I would negotiate rather than dominate. I leaned back against the couch and let out a slow breath. He chose the wrong motivation. Emily's voice softened. Because this is not about pride anymore. I met her eyes. No. It is about permanence. Upstairs, Noah shifted slightly, then settled again. I realized something then that I had not allowed myself to think clearly before. This was not simply about exposing Mercer. It was about restructuring everything that had made such exposure possible. Layers of oversight would change. Access would narrow. Loyalty would no longer be assumed. It would be verified. I stood and walked to the base of the staircase, resting my hand lightly against the railing. Tomorrow, I said quietly. I began dismantling the structure that allowed him to operate unseen. Emily stepped closer. And after that, I looked up toward the nursery. After that, I rebuilt it around something stronger than fear. She studied me carefully, as if measuring whether I meant it. I did. Power built on intimidation fractures under pressure. Power built on accountability endures. Mercer believed he understood leverage. He understood markets, influence, timing. What he failed to understand was this. When a man discovers he is a father, his threshold changes. The lines he once refused to cross become lines he refuses to allow others to approach. And tonight, in a quiet Brooklyn townhouse, that shift became permanent. The next morning began with silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was the silence of anticipation. I left Brooklyn before sunrise, the sky still a muted gray over the East River. The city felt suspended between night and day, as if it had not decided which direction to lean. I arrived at my Manhattan office at 7 sharp. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Steel. Precision. A world I had mastered long before I understood what it meant to protect something fragile. My executive team was already seated in the conference room when I walked in. Mercer sat 3 seats to my right, posture straight, expression neutral. He met my eyes without hesitation. Confident. Controlled. That was good. Fear makes people unpredictable. Confidence makes them careless. I began the meeting without raising my voice. Routine quarterly review. Compliance audit expansion. Structural oversight revisions. Words that sounded administrative but carried weight. Effective immediately, I said evenly. All senior access privileges will be restructured under a dual verification protocol. No single director will retain independent oversight over internal security routing. I did not look at Mercer when I said it. I did not need to. The subtle tightening of his jaw was visible even in peripheral vision. Additionally, I continued, all subsidiary investment channels will undergo forensic transparency review. Any undisclosed holdings will be considered breach of fiduciary trust. Silence settled over the table. Not shocked. Measured. They were calculating what this meant for them. Mercer leaned forward slightly. This seems abrupt, he said calmly. Is there a concern we are not aware of? There it was. The invitation to reveal my hand. I folded my hands on the table. There is always concern, I replied evenly. That is why we audit. His gaze held mine for a fraction longer than usual. He was searching for confirmation, suspicion, accusation. He would find none. I moved to the next agenda item. Expansion forecasts, regional acquisitions, operational metrics. Normal, predictable. Underneath it all, however, the system was tightening around him. By mid-morning, his mirrored communications had already revealed something new. A contingency document drafted but not yet sent. A scenario outlining leadership instability should executive focus shift due to personal matters. My personal matters. He had prepared for the possibility that I would become distracted, vulnerable. The irony almost made me smile. I ended the meeting just before noon. As everyone stood, Mercer approached me with professional composure. If there is something you need clarified, I am available, he said. His tone was respectful, measured. I looked at him steadily. I appreciate loyalty, I said calmly. I value transparency even more. A pause. Not long. Just enough. As do I, he replied. He walked away without another word. I remained by the window, overlooking the city. Cars moved below like veins carrying restless energy. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. A secure message from the Brooklyn security feed. Noah awake. Emily in the kitchen. No irregular activity. I exhaled slowly. For years, I thought control meant eliminating threats quickly and decisively. Now I understood that real control is building a system where betrayal has nowhere to hide. Mercer believed he had prepared for confrontation. He had not prepared for reform. And reform is far more difficult to resist. I turned away from the glass and began drafting the next directive. Not an attack, a restructuring. If my empire was to stand, it would not stand on fear anymore. It would stand on accountability. And the man who thought he could manipulate my absence was about to learn that presence can be far more powerful than intimidation ever was. Exposure does not happen in a single dramatic moment. It unfolds quietly, like light creeping under a closed door. By the third day of internal restructuring, the pattern was undeniable. Mercer's mirrored communications revealed escalating tension. Encrypted drafts deleted minutes after creation. Calls placed to the same intermediary but cut short. He was not reckless. He was cautious. But caution under pressure leaves fingerprints. I stood in my Manhattan office late that afternoon reviewing the compiled report. Every unauthorized access. Every concealed transfer. Every contingency plan referencing executive instability. It was thorough, clean, enough to dismantle him without spectacle. My phone buzzed softly with a live feed notification from Brooklyn. Noah was on the living room floor again, attempting to pull himself upright using the edge of the couch. Emily hovered nearby, hands half extended but allowing him to try. I watched through the small screen as he wobbled, determined, then steadied. That image stayed with me as I prepared for what came next. I called Mercer into my office just before closing hours. He entered composed, as always. Jacket buttoned. Expression neutral. "You wanted to see me," he said. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." No raised voice. No visible anger. That unsettles more than shouting ever could. I slid a thin folder across the desk. He did not open it immediately. He studied my face first. I let him. "Internal transparency review," I said evenly. "Your access history, your undisclosed investment vehicle, your communications with an external intermediary." His fingers finally moved, opening the folder slowly. The silence stretched. Page by page, the composure began to fracture. Not dramatically, subtly. A pause that lasted half a second too long. A swallow. A recalculation behind the eyes. "You misunderstand the context," he began carefully. I raised a hand slightly. "There is no context in which concealed leverage against executive leadership is acceptable." My tone did not change. It did not need to. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling. "I anticipated instability," he admitted. "Your personal life created vulnerabilities. I positioned myself to maintain continuity." I held his gaze steadily. "By threatening my family." His silence answered more than words could. I did not shout. I did not accuse further. I simply said, "You miscalculated one critical factor." He waited. "You assumed my response would be emotional." I stood slowly, walking around the desk, not aggressively, just deliberately. "Instead, it is structural." I outlined the next steps clearly. Immediate removal of his executive privileges. Board review scheduled within 48 hours. Forensic audit referral. No spectacle. No public scandal unless required. He would resign quietly or face formal exposure. Those were the options. Mercer understood then. Not because of intimidation. Because the evidence left no room to maneuver. He rose slowly. "You built this on loyalty," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "I built it on power. I am rebuilding it on accountability." He left without another word. When the door closed, the office felt larger. Quieter. I returned to the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in late afternoon light, unchanged, indifferent. Yet something fundamental had shifted. I had removed a threat without becoming the version of myself that once ruled by fear. My phone buzzed again. Another update from Brooklyn. Noah had successfully taken 2 small steps before collapsing into laughter. Emily's face glowed with pride behind him. I watched the replay once. Twice. In that simple, unsteady movement, I saw the future. Growth is unstable at first. Reform feels uncertain. But it holds if supported correctly. I slipped my phone into my pocket and turned away from the glass. The empire would survive. Stronger. Cleaner. Not because it was feared, but because it was watched carefully from within. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the most powerful transformation is the one no one sees coming until it is complete. The board accepted Mercer's resignation within 48 hours. Quietly. No headlines. No rumors leaked to competitors. His departure was framed as a strategic transition, a pursuit of private ventures. Clean. Controlled. Final. I watched the announcement draft on my screen before approving it, aware of how different this moment would have looked a year ago. Back then, I would have made an example of him. Publicly. Decisively. Fear travels faster than reform. But fear also leaves cracks. That evening, I left Manhattan earlier than usual. The sun was lowering behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the East River as I crossed back into Brooklyn. The townhouse windows glowed warm against the cooling sky. When I stepped inside, I found Emily sitting on the floor again, Noah balanced between her knees as he attempted another uncertain stand. "He has been trying all afternoon," she said softly. I set my jacket aside and crouched in front of him. "Show me," I murmured. He wobbled, small fingers curling into Emily's sleeve before releasing. For one suspended second, he stood alone. Then he took a step toward me. Unsteady. Determined. I reached out instinctively, but did not grab him. I let him try. He stumbled forward into my chest, and I caught him easily, lifting him into my arms. The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a triumphant shout. I held him there, feeling the solid weight of him against me, the warmth of his small body grounding everything. Emily watched us, eyes shining but calm. "It is done," I said quietly. She did not ask for details. She did not need them. "And?" she asked gently. I looked down at Noah, who was now gripping the collar of my shirt as if it were an anchor. "And it did not require destruction." She nodded slowly. That mattered. Upstairs later, after Noah had fallen asleep, we stood side by side near the nursery door. The night light cast a soft halo around the crib. "You changed more than the structure," Emily said. I considered that. "I had to," I replied, "if I wanted this to last." She turned to face me fully then. 15 months ago, we had signed papers believing distance would protect us. We had both been wrong in different ways. "You are not untouchable," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "I am accountable." The word felt stronger than any title I had carried. We walked downstairs together and sat in the quiet living room, the city humming faintly beyond the walls. My phone lay silent on the coffee table. No urgent alerts. No concealed threats. Just the steady rhythm of a world that no longer needed to be controlled through fear. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. "I built an empire thinking it would define me," I said. It did not. Emily reached for my hand, not out of dependency, but choice. "Then what does?" she asked softly. I glanced toward the staircase where our son slept. "He does." The skyline across the river shimmered in the distance, unchanged, but I felt something within it shift. Power can command a city. It can silence opposition. It can intimidate rivals. But none of it compares to the quiet moment when a child takes his first steps toward you, trusting you will be there. I once ruled through distance. Now I stand close enough to be needed. And that is a different kind of strength entirely.